Jamil Abdullah Al-Amin, better known in his youth as H. Rap Brown, died at 82 this week, and his life reads like a mirror of America's turbulent second half of the 20th century. He was at once a charismatic voice for black militancy in the 1960s, a later-life Muslim cleric and community leader, and a figure wrapped in controversy after a courtroom conviction left him serving life in prison. Today we'll walk through his story. The speeches, the transformation, the legal battles, and why he still matters. Born Hubert Gerold Brown in Baton Rouge in 1943, he rose from modest roots to become one of the most electrifying youth leaders of the civil rights era. By his mid-20s he was a national figure, chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, a forceful public speaker with a booming voice, and a man who pushed his movement to think differently about tactics and power. He famously urged black people to stand up forcefully against oppression, language that alarmed many but also resonated with those who had waited too long for justice. That rhetoric, blunt, provocative, and sometimes incendiary, placed him at the center of the so-called Black Power movement. He famously declared that violence had always been part of America's history, a point made to shock but also to force listeners to reckon with a long record of conflict. The phrases he used circulated widely in the press and turned him into both an inspiration for some and a target for others. He was arrested repeatedly on weapons and conspiracy charges, and for a time he was on the FBI's most wanted list. But his story didn't stop at confrontation. In the mid-1970s, after time behind bars for earlier convictions, he said he had found a new path. He converted to Islam, changed his name to Jamil Abdullah Al-Amin, and settled in Atlanta where he opened a mosque, ran a small store, and worked as a community leader. Neighbors remembered him as the kind of person who organized youth games, counseled young people, and tried to reduce street crime. To many in the West End of Atlanta, he became a pillar, a quiet religious figure who kept his head down and focused on local service. And yet, authorities still watched him closely. In the 1990s, amid a wave of investigations, law enforcement files cited a range of inquiries that were opened around his activities, some serious, some unproven. Supporters say those probes were the result of overreach and a long federal interest in monitoring nationalist leaders. Critics argued the files reflected legitimate concern. Either way, the files fed a debate that would follow him for decades. That debate erupted into tragedy in March 2000. On a night when deputies approached his store in Atlanta to serve a warrant, a heavily armed shooter opened fire. One deputy, Richard Kinchin, later died. Another officer survived. Al-Amin was arrested days later and, after a trial in which the chief witness identified him, he was convicted in a case involving the death of that deputy. He was sentenced to life without parole and ultimately held in federal custody. His conviction remains contested in some circles. Supporters have pointed to alleged withheld evidence and other irregularities, and they mounted appeals and campaigns for a new hearing. Critics of those efforts say the jury's verdict and the legal process should be respected. The differing views reflect deeper divisions over policing, surveillance of black activists, and how the justice system treats high-profile figures. In the years that followed, Al-Amin's story took on larger themes: redemption and reinvention on the one hand, suspicion and prosecution on the other. He spent long periods in solitary confinement at times, prompting his family to argue that his treatment raised constitutional concerns. His case became another flashpoint in the national conversation about civil liberties, national security, and the state's response to dissent. This week, officials said he died at the Federal Medical Center in Butner, North Carolina. The Bureau of Prisons confirmed his death, but did not specify a cause. Earlier reporting noted his health had been declining, with reports of multiple myeloma and other issues, but the official statement kept details sparse. As with other moments in his life, the lack of full public information has left room for questions and commentary, and will likely do so until more is officially released. How should history remember Jamil Abdullah Al-Amin? For many, he is a reminder of a time when American politics was bristling with urgency and impatience, when young leaders demanded change in language that provoked thought. For others, he became a cautionary figure, someone whose rhetoric in the 1960s sometimes crossed into calls for violent resistance, with consequences that echoed through his later life. He also illustrates the complicated arc of a generation of activists who moved from public protest to community building. The shift from H. Rap Brown's fiery speeches to Jamil Al-Amin's mosque leadership shows how identities evolve, and how people respond to the pressures and possibilities life hands them. And there's a human side too. He was a son, a brother, a husband and a father. Colleagues testified on his behalf in court. Neighbors spoke of his community work. Even critics have acknowledged that his life was not one-dimensional. He inspired fierce loyalty and provoked deep unease, sometimes both at once. In the end, his death closes one chapter but opens another in public memory. People will sift through speeches, trial records, interviews and community testimonies to decide what kind of figure he was. Some will celebrate the firebrand turned cleric who spent decades trying to help his neighborhood. Others will re-examine the violence and the legal decisions that defined his later years. Jamil Abdullah Al-Amin's life forces us to reckon with uncomfortable questions about protest, power, and punishment in America. It asks whether redemption is possible after radicalism, how society should balance safety and dissent, and how history should weigh the actions of those who challenge a status quo they find unjust. Whatever view people take, one fact is clear. His voice, at times thunderous, at times quiet, changed conversations in America. And now that he's gone, those conversations will continue without him, shaped by the memory of what he said, what he did, and the long, complicated life he led. Comment what you think about this. If you like the video, then don't forget to subscribe. It really motivates us to create helpful videos.